Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk about, I guess I'm going to call it hyperbolic language. And by that I mean, it's something I mentioned very briefly on my previous episode, just using words to describe things that don't mean exactly what is trying to be expressed. So overall hyperbole is just exaggerating pretty much. I'm not talking about using hyperbolic language in a joke or sarcasm or even a dramatic manner. It's something I use a lot. For example, I'll say, "Oh, I hate going to school," things like that. And realistically, I don't actually hate school. I strongly dislike it at times, but hate is such a strong language to use to describe something that it is absolutely not fitting for something as mundane as school. Um, but that's not really the issue I'm trying to cover in this episode. I'm trying to talk about people that genuinely believe that their suffering is a bigger issue than it actually is, or are saying very hyperbolic things just for the sake of attention, or I guess we'll call it clout chasing, is what the kids will say these days. And before we get too deep into this, I do want to remind all of you that I am absolutely not a doctor. I am not a therapist of any sort. So if you do feel any of these emotions or whatever, definitely go to a doctor, get things checked out. But I'm just speaking from my own experiences and spitballing with how I feel about things. So the first one I'm going to hit on, which I talked about, the first two I'm going to talk about, I mentioned very briefly in my previous episode when I was talking about my Crohn's disease, is first, depression versus being sad. I think there's a lot of people that either genuinely believe that they are depressed when in actuality they are sad and upset about things, and they're upset about very reasonable things, or they have sad things happening in their life. That's all very possible. But there's a big difference between being sad about things and being genuinely depressed, like clinically depressed. From my experience with depression and things like that, it is a suffocating feeling. It is way beyond anything you would ever consider sad. Like, I was sad when my dog died, or even when family members passed away, things like that. But depression is one of those things where it physically hurts to be alive, basically, because of how just down you are. It's not something that's even easily expressed in words. That's, I guess, part of the reason why a lot of people will say they're depressed when in actuality they're sad or upset. Depression is just one of those things that, unless you have truly felt it, you don't really recognize what depression is. It's just, these are these little things that probably don't matter that much, but I feel like it's important to recognize the differences between the main word and like these clinical terms versus basic emotions that a lot of people feel. And I think that that's something that gets glossed over a lot in media in general, social media specifically, and social situations. But a lot of people will also use terms like "oh, I'm so depressed," as a way of garnering attention, either positive or negative, through social media outlets. This is very common, especially among teenagers. When I was growing up through high school, people would make a Twitter post like, "Oh, so depressed," blah, blah, blah. And mostly just fishing for people to kind of make them feel better. In my experience with depression, it's so often that people that are feeling genuine depression aren't seeking help a lot of times, unless they have gone through treatment and recognize when they're in depressive episodes and need to reach out for help. Someone that's first time dealing with depression or hasn't had proper experience getting help is a lot of times pushing away any help or not seeking, trying to cut themselves off from society. And yes, depression works differently for all people. I'm, again, not a doctor. I'm just talking from my own experiences. It's just, they're very radically different things. They're almost opposites in a way, while talking about a similar emotion of being upset. So I think that's enough on that one. The next one I'm going to talk about, which again I was talking about in my previous episode, is fatigue versus being tired. This is a big one for me because growing up with Crohn's disease, I have felt genuine fatigue, and there's a big difference between being fatigued and being drained or tired or worn out, things like that. There's also a mental and physical aspect of both these words. So first I want to talk about the physical, the more concrete thing of being physically fatigued, where you are so drained from energy that you cannot move. You could hardly even keep your eyes open because you just have no energy left in your body. You can't wake up in the morning. You can't physically get out of bed because your body is so exhausted from the energy it is expends for whatever is causing fatigue, in my case, Crohn's disease, that it makes you incapable of living life. Tired, you could be extremely tired. You could be tired to the point you don't want to get out of bed and things like that. But usually, if you reach that level of tired, you could even call it fatigued if you're at that level of tired because you've expended so much energy through an activity that you can't move. Very different moving wise. I'm saying the tiredness preventing you from moving, not like pain from, like, let's say you worked out for 8 hours in a day or something like that and you're so tired that the next day you can't get out of bed. That's a different thing to being unable to get out of bed from fatigue. So tiredness, I think a lot of people will confuse, like, if you stay up one night to study kind of thing, you stay up till 4 a.m. studying and then you have to wake up at 3 a.m. the next day and all day you feel real tired. Feeling tired throughout the day but still kind of getting through your day isn't really fatigue. Again, not a doctor. Sure, I might be wrong as heck about all this stuff, but that's the way I've understood it my whole life. And I feel like fatigue-wise, I do know what I'm talking about, even more so than depression versus sadness. Also, I guess I'll briefly hit on the idea of mental fatigue versus, like, being tired and all that. Mental fatigue, it's more like being so exhausted with going through life. It almost related to sadness. It's so exhausted with going through life that you don't want to deal with mentally socializing with people, going out and doing activities. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe what I'm describing as mental fatigue is just another part of depression. So I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I think a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm sick of going to parties, or oh, I'm sick of, like, hanging out with this person, and they'll almost describe it as, like, mentally fatigued from that person or emotionally fatigued from that person. When realistically, I think that there's a more clinical aspect to something like a mental fatigue. In general, both of these kind of wrap up, depression and the mental fatigue side. Mental disability in general is one of those things that a lot of people will talk about being mentally disabled in one way or another, when in actuality, chances are they just need to find better ways to deal with their emotions. There's a lot of people that will say, oh, I have ADHD, I'm so OCD, things like that, which, yes, a lot of times it's as a joke or sarcasm, dramatic or whatever, but there are people that think, oh, I haven't been diagnosed or anything, but I definitely have ADHD or ADD, or I'm not good with proper language, so I apologize. But I've known people with those genuine disabilities, mental disabilities, and it's such a different thing than what you're experiencing when you have a burst of energy and want to clean the whole house one day because you got that second wind. That's not ADD. You don't have little spurts of ADD. It's something that you usually combat for your entire life and have to rigorously train your body and mind to get over through, like, coping mechanisms and all that. Those are true mental disabilities, as opposed to what a lot of people will call mental disability when they're really just having a moment of energy, in the case of ADD or OCD, just being really organized about things is not OCD. There's a whole classification of OCD that goes so far beyond, like, oh, I like to make sure that I color coordinate my classes and my schedule. That's just being organized. So I think a lot of people will either fail to recognize that or use it as a way of, like, garnering attention, which is a big issue. On the side of that garnering attention aspect, one of my biggest, I guess we'll call it a pet peeve, but I think that's not saying strongly enough how much I dislike people that will go on social media outlets to look for attention for things that have become, I want to use the word fantasize, but that's probably not the right word. In social media, a lot of negative things have become, like, trendy in a way on social media. The main things I'm thinking about are abuse, sexuality, and loneliness. These are genuine issues and emotions that people are feeling, where sometimes people will either exaggerate their own experiences or fully make up their own experiences and emotions just to kind of be in with the crowd. And I do recognize this is not everyone. I'm not saying that everyone out there that's, had feelings for someone of the same gender and has had issues with their sexuality. I'm not saying everyone is lying about their sexuality, but I do think that there's a very significant portion, or a higher portion than there should be, of people out there that say, "Oh, I'm so gay," and will not even believe that they're gay in any way, whether it be bisexual, whatever it is. They'll claim it when it's just them having a genuine, like, a attraction to the same gender. Things like that I think are very common, and I don't think it's acknowledged enough. And sure, like I said, not a doctor, not a therapist in any way. I could be wrong as heck about this. But with that being said, I think it's something that goes on way too often on social media. Abuse is a very, very big one. There are people that, yes, there is verbal and emotional abuse, but there is a big difference between being abused emotionally and verbally and getting in a fight with your significant other. I think there's people that don't recognize that, like showing off one string of texts of when your significant other was in a bad mood and wasn't nice to you is not a pattern history of abuse. It could be. I could be wrong. That text you sent and posted to tens of thousands of people on Twitter could be you reaching out for help. That is possible. In my experiences, when people are dealing with these major issues, they usually don't reach out to the entirety of social media for help first. That's not their first source. They usually reach out to a close friend, a mentor, a therapist, someone that has some training or can deal with them on a personal level. Loneliness was another one I also mentioned. There's people that will talk about online how they're all alone in the world and just looking for someone to be their friend, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times that'll come from people that have plenty of friends and stuff. They want more friends, and that's fine. You could have more friends or desire more friends. But being alone in the world is not getting 280 messages on your birthday about happy birthday and those little photo collage things of all the times this friend was with you and the pictures of you guys together. People that are alone in the world don't get that. People that are alone in the world usually spend every holiday of their life, including their birthday, alone. So I know I'm clearly talking about this from a sensitive subject, and I'm not trying to downgrade anyone's feelings. It's just I genuinely think these are issues that go very unrecognized because people are afraid to call out what they think is BS. And that's something that I think hopefully starts with us stopping ourselves from doing it. And it's something that I need to work on myself too. I'm not going to act like I'm mightier than thou. I know that I will often use dramatic and sarcastic language of hyperbole and using words I shouldn't to describe how I'm feeling. But I do try and make a statement of saying that when I'm feeling those emotions, there's a difference between the true clinical definitions and what I'm expressing. So with that being said, this was a very dark, sad video. Hopefully I'll come up with something more fun and entertaining tomorrow, but just something that was on my mind, figured I'd get it off my chest. So I'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.